This wasn't a press conference, it was a warning. Late Monday night in Miami, on the tarmac after the college football national championship, Donald Trump stepped in front of cameras for what looked routine: short remarks, a few questions. Then the contradictions started stacking fast. Casual setting, extraordinary claims, and they were delivered calmly, on camera, without hesitation. This matters to you because these weren't abstract opinions. They were direct statements about power, territory, and global alliances spoken by a sitting president. When asked if he had invited Vladimir Putin to join what he called a board of peace, Trump didn't dodge. He said, yeah, he's been invited. No clarification, no explanation. Seconds later, asked about France, he pivoted to punishment. Referring to President Emmanuel Macron, Trump said he would impose a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, not behind closed doors, not as leverage, publicly. Then the story flipped. Greenland came up. Trump said, we have to have it, dismissing Denmark's claim by saying a boat went there 500 years ago. Said plainly, said seriously. Notice what he didn't say. No limits, no process, no restraint. And once you see the pattern forming here, it's impossible to unsee where this goes next. What happened in Miami didn't come out of nowhere. It fits a pattern that's been forming in plain sight. The core event isn't just that Trump spoke off the cuff, it's that in one appearance he connected Putin, tariffs on France, Greenland, NATO, and the Nobel Prize into a single worldview, one where pressure replaces diplomacy and personal grievance drives policy. Here's what we know as fact. On camera, Trump confirmed inviting Vladimir Putin to his so-called peace board. He publicly threatened a 200% tariff on French wine and champagne after Macron declined to participate. He stated, we have to have Greenland, dismissing Denmark's sovereignty by arguing historical claims don't count. And he asserted that Norway controls the Nobel Peace Prize, saying, I don't care what Norway says. Now step back. These aren't isolated remarks. They all point in the same direction. Allies are treated as obstacles, institutions as illegitimate, and force, economic or otherwise, as the default solution. But here's the part most coverage skips. None of this language was conditional. He didn't say consider or negotiate or explore. He spoke in certainties, in possession, in entitlement. So ask yourself this. When a president stops speaking in hypotheticals and starts speaking in ownership, what does that signal about what comes next? Because once leaders hear that tone, they don't wait for clarification. They prepare. Here's the claim that changes how this moment should be read. This wasn't a rant. It was a declaration of posture. Fact. When asked directly whether Vladimir Putin was invited to Trump's board of peace, Trump responded, yes, he's one of the people. That's a verbatim on-camera answer. Fact. Moments later, when questioned about Macron's refusal, Trump said he would respond by putting a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes. Fact. There was no mention of Congress, no reference to trade law, no process outlined. Now slow that down. Those words weren't framed as jokes or pressure tactics. They were delivered as decisions already made. The meaning isn't subtle. It signals that foreign policy in this framework is no longer mediated through institutions. It's personal, transactional, and immediate. Notice what's missing. There's no acknowledgement of alliances, no reference to treaties, no limiting language at all. The absence is the message. And once that boundary disappears, the escalation doesn't stay rhetorical for long. Now watch how this escalates, because the shift happens quietly. Fact. When the topic moved to Greenland, Trump said, we have to have it, and argued that Denmark's claim doesn't count because a boat went there 500 years ago. That wasn't framed as a negotiation. It was framed as inevitability. He added that Denmark can't protect it and that the United States would be talking about it with the various people. Again, no mention of consent, no mention of limits. Here's why that matters. Historically, powerful countries don't start by saying, we will take. They start by saying this is necessary: security, protection, inevitability. That language is familiar because it's how extraordinary actions get normalized before they happen. And notice how fast this became normal in the room. There was no collective pushback on camera, no sharp interruption. The idea of acquiring territory from a NATO ally was treated as just another policy discussion. This is where the story flips. When something that should trigger alarm instead produces calm follow-ups, it means the boundary has already shifted. And once that boundary moves, the next step doesn't feel radical anymore. Here's where the contradiction locks in. Fact. In the same appearance, Trump insisted he had done more for NATO than anybody else, claiming he pushed members to pay more and saying, "I don't think you'd have NATO right now without him." That statement came immediately after arguing the United States has to have Greenland, territory controlled by a NATO member. Those two claims can't comfortably exist together. On one hand, he presents himself as NATO's savior. On the other, he openly challenges the sovereignty of an alliance partner. That tension isn't accidental. It reveals how power is being framed. Alliances are useful when they comply, disposable when they don't. Then the focus shifted again. Fact. Trump said Norway controls the Nobel Peace Prize, dismissed the committee's independence, and stated flatly, "I don't care what Norway says." He also said a very fine woman believed he deserved the prize and that he appreciated that support, while insisting he didn't actually care about the award. Here's the line that changes how all of this lands. Grievance and authority are being expressed in the same breath. Praise is claimed, rejection is punished, and legitimacy is decided unilaterally. Once leaders start publicly rejecting the independence of institutions while asserting personal entitlement, the issue is no longer about policy disagreement. It's about who gets to define reality, and that's when the pressure starts moving faster than anyone can control. Now the situation compresses, and this is where control starts slipping. Fact. Trump declared that inflation was effectively over, saying, "We have very little inflation," and that prices were coming down still further. Fact. He described the United States as the hottest country anywhere in the world, claimed the stock market was at an all-time high, and told reporters their own 401ks were the best they've ever been. This wasn't framed as optimism, it was framed as settled reality. Then came Davos. Asked what message he would deliver to world leaders, Trump said it would be simple, how incredible the country is doing, repeating that America had gone from a dead country to the hottest country in the world. No caveats, no acknowledgement of dispute, just dominance. Stack these moments together. Foreign leaders are threatened with tariffs, territorial claims are asserted, international institutions are dismissed. And at the same time, economic perfection is declared, pressure up, self-confidence absolute. Here's the danger signal. When leaders present multiple contested realities as unquestionable facts, they eliminate off-ramps. Disagreement becomes denial. Pushback becomes hostility. So ask the uncomfortable question. If this pace continues, if every challenge is met with escalation and certainty, what happens when reality refuses to cooperate? Now shift the frame, because this doesn't stay abstract for long. Fact. Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego, a military veteran, warned on camera that when leaders stop thinking purely of peace, it's not elites who pay the price. He said it's young men from Ohio, from New Mexico, from Arizona, from New York, who end up fighting what he called dumb wars. He made it personal, saying those decisions don't send leaders' children, they send ordinary Americans. That's where this lands on you. Because when territory, tariffs, and alliances are discussed casually, the consequences don't stay on a podium. They show up in deployments, in markets, in costs that hit families who never voted on any of it. And notice the contrast. On one side, confidence, certainty, and dominance. On the other, the reminder that war and economic retaliation don't fall evenly. They concentrate quietly, predictably. This is the part that feels familiar to a lot of people. Big decisions framed as strength, the bill sent somewhere else. If this tension feels recognizable, say so in the comments. Because once public warnings like this start appearing on major networks, it usually means something larger is already in motion. Here's the deeper mechanism that makes all of this possible, and it's quieter than the speeches. This isn't driven by chaos. It's driven by incentives. Fact. Trump repeatedly dismissed institutions, NATO norms, trade frameworks, independent committees, while elevating spectacle and personal leverage. Cameras become the arena. Pressure becomes the tool. The louder the moment, the less space there is for process. Here's how the system bends. When every statement is framed as strength, backing down becomes weakness. When disagreement is treated as disrespect, compromise disappears. And when attention rewards escalation, escalation becomes rational behavior inside the system, even if it's destabilizing outside of it. This is why the focus keeps shifting. One moment it's Putin, then Macron, then Greenland, then Norway, then Davos. Speed isn't accidental. It overwhelms response time. It forces institutions to react instead of deliberate. And here's the unsettling insight. Systems built on attention don't collapse all at once. They normalize shock first. Once shock stops working, the next move has to be bigger. That's why this story isn't about any single statement. It's about momentum. And momentum, once it builds, doesn't need intent to keep moving. Now look ahead, because the next phase is already taking shape. There are two paths from here, and neither is abstract. Fact. European leaders have already begun responding cautiously, trying to de-escalate and find an off-ramp, according to comments aired alongside this coverage. That's one path. Slow things down, absorb the pressure, hope the rhetoric stays rhetorical. But there's another path forming at the same time. When threats are repeated publicly, tariffs, territorial claims, institutional dismissal, other governments don't wait for clarification forever. They hedge, they prepare, they reinforce alliances without saying so out loud. They plan for instability while publicly projecting calm. This is where uncertainty becomes dangerous, because both sides can believe they're preventing escalation, while their actions quietly increase it. One side speaks in certainty, the other side prepares in silence. And here's the key detail. Once preparation begins, momentum doesn't need new statements to continue. It feeds on anticipation. So the question isn't whether something will happen tomorrow. It's whether the next move is already being shaped behind the scenes while the public is still debating tone. Because by the time consequences are visible, the decision point has usually passed. Here's the insight that ties all of this together. What happened on that tarmac wasn't about a meltdown. It was about normalization. When threats sound casual, when ownership is spoken aloud, and when institutions are brushed aside without consequence, the story isn't the words themselves. It's how quickly everyone is expected to adjust to them. Reframe the entire sequence in one sentence. This was a public rehearsal for a world where power no longer explains itself. And once you see it that way, every detail clicks into place. The certainty, the speed, the dismissal of limits, the confidence that reality will bend to will. That's not random. That's a governing style testing how much resistance still exists. The reason this matters going forward is simple. Moments like this don't end cleanly. They either get checked or they get repeated, louder, faster, and with higher stakes. And the next time it happens, it won't feel shocking at all. It will feel familiar. If you want to understand where this trajectory leads before it becomes obvious, follow and subscribe for the next layer of analysis. Because the most important part of this story isn't what was said, it's what happens once saying it stops being controversial.